Now, we had this rally on the S&P and the NASDAQ today continue, and the VIX was only down 1% today. It had moved higher, up as high as just over 16, but it pulled back and it closed just slightly under 15 to 14.65, but it was as high as 16. Watching the VIX as it's hovering here around the 200 and the 50 as they got a bullish golden cross. Had a bullish falling wedge here that I've drew some boundaries at, and again, still possible we redefine those, but again, the VIX is slightly lower. It was higher. It tried to get above that 50-period moving average, and it couldn't do it. Get above 16. If we can get above that 50-period moving average, volatility will return to the S&P 500. The question is, do we get a shallow retracement, a deep retracement, or a complete reversal? Correction is not done yet. VIX is becoming very, very oversold. CD is still in positive territory here. And again, I'll be watching to see the overbought 60-minute charts begin to cause the rising wedges on the NASDAQ and the S&P to break down. I'm going to show you what to watch for in this video, and I'm going to show you some of my intraday charts because, again, we're getting these wild swings, and they do a really good job of capturing moves back and forth, but I'll start showing you those because we are now starting to get pretty wild swings. 16% in just over 3 weeks, and then the last 3 days of it dropping 11% there on the NASDAQ, and then this big move back up the last 2 weeks. Wild price fluctuations. Some really important charts to show you that, but I do want to say on Tuesday I'm going to be traveling to go and celebrate my anniversary. After the market closes on Tuesday, I won't be able to post anything. I'll be traveling. Anything major happens, I'll try to post something that morning, something very short. If you just start to sell off, reversal could be starting. We get something dramatic. Try to post something very short, very quick for the Wednesday session. I apologize. If something major happens, I'll try to post something early during the market session. Otherwise, my next video will be Wednesday. I never miss making videos. This is something that couldn't be avoided, so I thank you for understanding. If anything major happens, I will do my very best to post something done in the market session on Wednesday. There will be no video traveling on Tuesday, traveling to go and celebrate my anniversary. Again, with volatility, if we do see a spike back up in volatility above the 50-period moving average, we can see a sell-off in the S&P 500. The question is, correction now done, or are we going to get a larger one, or is this a bottom right here and we get a pullback? So do we have a 5-leg structure higher if we've completed an ABC move here? No guarantee of that. Again, I'm talking about the Elliott wave count, things I'm considering. I do expect NASDAQ's going to go up and eventually fill the gap at 20,400. It's not there. It's not near the highs. S&P is. We'll see if we get a pullback. We're very overbought on the 60-minute charts. Just want to bring something to your attention. And I talked about a deeper retracement. Another possibility is that we get a more shallow retracement, and we're getting a 5-leg push up right now to complete a top ahead of the Fed meeting. I told you again, the market is going to form a topping process ahead of the Fed, with the Fed, or shortly after the Fed. One of those. So again, a good chance, like in 2000, it peaked ahead of the Fed, doing the pivot, doing the rate cut, which I believe they're going to do in September. Also have 2007 where they did the cut and the market peaked shortly thereafter, a few weeks later, about 2.5, 3 weeks later or so. Elliott wave speculation, but I'm just sharing with you something that I'm looking at. Again, I told you I thought the S&P would move higher. So again, this is likely a 3-leg push lower. NASDAQ's already peaked. Okay? But if this is the completion of the correction, and it's not one of these where you get a correction here, a rebound back up, and then another corrective move, and you come back and you take out this low, it's still possible. Okay? It's possible that this is one big large correction, but it's also possible, if the correction is done, that we've completed a 3-leg count. And it is possible that the correction is done and that we're now starting this final 5th leg higher, if this is not a larger corrective move. It still could be. We've had other times in history where we've had big rallies back up, but then they have failed and we've gone down to new lows, in larger corrections, getting wild, exaggerated moves up and down, becoming overbought. If we pull back and we get a sell-off, maybe to come back and fill the gap here, or maybe the gap, moving back towards filling this gap, or not quite doing it, moving towards the cloud, or maybe just beyond the 50-period moving average, or maybe something even more shallow. Again, is it possible that we have a 5-leg structure up here with 1, 2, and this is 3? We pull back, we get 4, and we go on to get 5. Now, again, that would mean, if that is the case, and I don't know that that is the case, Elliott wave is totally speculation. It's just something I'm pondering, something I'm thinking about, that, did wave 3 finish here? We have 4 here, and we're now going to get 5 here. Maybe, okay? Elliott wave is speculation. We still may be in a larger correction, but it's just something to think about. 2022 top, when we got it, we had moved just above this level right here. And there was a lot of back and forth moves in the topping process, but it eventually moved to a new high. Could we see something like that here? If that's the case, we could see a bigger move down with NASDAQ and not as big a move down with S&P. If NASDAQ is in an ABC corrective phase that will set up a lower high. Again, absolutely no guarantee this count plays out. It is speculation, but it's something I'm looking at because I was looking for a 3-leg structure down. If it's done and we're not in a larger corrective move, we'll be getting a 5-leg push higher right here, right now. Directly overhead is the gap resistance right here from this gap lower. That's directly overhead. And then you've got the gap fill up here. NASDAQ is nowhere near filling that gap yet. Remember, NASDAQ dropped nearly 16%. S&P only dropped just under 10%. So just something to consider, something to think about. If we do pull back and we just come back towards the cloud or come back just beyond the 50-period moving average, overlap this level right here, then again, you've got a possible 5-leg structure. Again, Elliott wave of speculation, counts, and I have other counts going on. Counts get invalidated with the Elliott wave, and invalidated all the time. So keep that in mind. But it's just, I'm looking at this as this possible wave 3 right here. Is it a wave C, an ABC, and we're going to get another leg down, and we're going to come back and take out this low. So again, it could be a 3-3-5 pattern. 3-3, 3 down, and then 3 back up, and then a 5 lower. It could be a complex correction, and that's why, again, Elliott wave is speculation. All I try to use it for is to validate or invalidate things. Keep that in mind. Now, as what I can tell you is, if we, again, do take out the cloud, the momentum line, the 20 period here, if you start to turn, see if we get a pullback or reversal, and again, be a shallow pullback, it could be a deeper pullback, and I'll be watching all the gaps I've been talking about. Sorry, I'm posting just a little bit late today. I was watching the stock market during the session. I'm getting ready to travel and celebrate my anniversary. Had to do some things after the market closed, so I'm just a little bit late here, but I want to just share with you some of these intraday charts I'm watching. Again, I was watching this throughout the session, and I was looking to see if a green bar would form. Right now, the market just reopened for the session for tomorrow, the Tuesday session, and we are starting off with a green bar. So again, likely going to form a divergence here and here on the MACD. And again, it happens with futures overnight. This is first bar into the new session. Before the stock market opens, we're going to have this bar plus 3 other bars, and then we'll get the 4-hour bar right before the market opens. Have this bar, plus you're going to have 3 other bars, and then you're going to have the bar that will form right a half hour before the market opens. So you're going to have possibly 4 green bars, and again, we'll see if we start selling off during the session at some point, completing this divergence with futures overnight. It could be that we get a rally initially, and a reversal could start tomorrow. That is very, very possible if this divergence completes here on the 4-hour chart. This is NASDAQ 100 futures. Again, very similar to the 60-minute chart of the S&P. Again, the 50 is still below the 200. We turn off of these 200s, we start turning back down, we take out the 20 periods, we take out the 200, then again we could see some kind of retracement, and then we'll be watching how big of a sell-off we get. But divergences forming here on the MACD, on the awesome oscillator. The RSIs are moving to new highs. What happens with that? This is the NASDAQ futures 4-hour chart. Futures just reopened as I'm making the video here. Again, a little bit late because of some things I had to do. It's up about 11 points. I was watching this today. Again, Divergences over here gave us a drop below the 50 to test the 200, eventually to drop below the 200 here. Again, very similar to the 60-minute chart on the S&P. Went back and tested that 200 after we broke below it. Back below the 50, got that 8% drop real fast, but now we're rebounding. We're getting back above the 50, back above the 200. Again, they're probably going to get well, maybe if we get a sharp sell-off, they may not get a bullish cross, but if we shallow pullback, see a bullish cross and a drop back below some of the gaps. But again, same thing here. I was watching to see if we get a green bar today because we were pushing higher. It didn't happen, but in after hours, we're getting it. Look at that. And again, you're going to get bar. You're going to get 3 more bars before opening bar, the 4-hour bar for the market. Again, will be a half hour before the market opens. So you're going to get another 3 more bars. So you're going to probably get more green here. We'll see if a divergence begins to form throughout Tuesday's session. If a reversal tries to start. If the clouds flip right here. So over here, the cloud flipped. And we got the little divergence completing. And that took us below the 50. So the 20 period on the 60-minute chart, watch it access to futures. The 4-hour chart here, again, if we start to flip, you take out the 20 period, you take out, and if we start breaking below, we kind of consolidated here. If we start breaking below this consolidation right here, we're going to see the cloud flip. We're going to start taking out the 20 period moving average and the 10 period moving average, and then we'll see. So again, this is the S&P futures. Again, I'll be watching to see if a divergence tries to complete overnight or on into tomorrow's session. But I'm watching this cloud right here because when this thing flips, that's probably going to give us the reversal in all likelihood. And we're forming divergences here on the 4-hour chart, on the 60-minute charts. NASDAQ was up 1.32% today, up 257 points. Again, talked about this, this stream right here, the 200. Told you to watch the moving averages and the gap fills. Again, we move beyond those levels. Above the 20 period, you got above the 10 period and the 50 period there on the 60-minute charts, and it took us up to this 50 period. We're overthrowing it and filling this gap right here. So we've now filled 3 of the gaps. You have this one way up here. If we get a pullback on the S&P, see a sharp decline on the NASDAQ, again, it could be that we have an ABC move. If this is a 5-leg structure lower, on the NASDAQ and the S&P got a 3-leg structure lower, again, we can have A, B, and then get a C up to fill this gap. Again, even if it's not as deep, again, we could just see a pullback and then again, going on. But again, S&P, if we go up to fill this gap after a pullback, a shallow pullback or a deeper pullback, again, S&P gapped at that very top. It's likely going to go fill that gap. If it doesn't do it immediately here, it could still roll over here, just like turning down with pullbacks, but then we turn back up. Now again, S&P is closing in on gap resistance and the gap fill, which again is at the top. NASDAQ is not near the top. Come back and fill the gap today at 19,754. And again, at the very end of the day, we had short covering by day traders. So again, I'll be watching to see how this unfolds. Again, I think you still have a very good shot of a top here, but because we're getting these exaggerated moves, big sharp move down here, big sharp move down here for 3 days. In 3 days, we dropped nearly 11%. We dropped in totality nearly 16%, very fast in just a few weeks. Peaked on the 10th. We bottomed out here on the 5th of August, so it's just a few weeks. Now this big rebound back up. So again, watching to see if we get a pullback. Is it a pullback that's going to be shallow or will it be a deep pullback? We have these gaps in here now. These are the gaps up, by the way, that were over here and over here and over here. I'll show you the gaps on NASDAQ. Here are the gaps on NASDAQ. Again, sharp decline, 15.75%. Again, you had this big move down over 2 weeks, similar to the rebound back up, big move down, rebound here, and then over 3 days we dropped nearly 11%. These big moves down, these big moves up, and again, overbought. Divergences on some indicators. Indicators are moving to new extremes, like the RSI on the S&P 60-minute chart. We have these rising wedges, so I'll be watching to see what happens. NASDAQ's now filling the gap here at the 19,700 level. We filled that, and again, watching. Do we get a violent move down and a bigger sell-off, or do we get a shallow pullback? When I say a violent move down that comes down to try to take out this level, or do we just come back and fill some of these gaps, or again, do we fill some of them or all of them? And again, if S&P pulls back, it very well could be NASDAQ here, again, is forming a larger ABC structure that eventually comes back up here and again fills a gap. Does that happen going into a Fed pivot in September? Does it happen with the Fed or shortly after that? Looking for clues, but again, as we became very oversold with these moves down, now we're becoming very, very overbought. Probably going to, on the NASDAQ anyways, probably see another exaggerated move. Again, distribution that will likely be followed by a bigger rally up. We're going to see how big the next sell-off is with the S&P 500. Been seeing the sell-offs. Tech has really been taking a bigger hit, likely going to continue. Again, I've talked about this. If we have bottomed, again, you possibly have A followed by B down here somewhere and then back up to fill the gap with a C move if this is a 5-leg structure lower. And Elliott wave is speculation. But again, we're likely going to see this roll over here at some point this week. Jackson Hole, we got Powell speaking on Friday. We got the FOMC minutes before, or during the market session, I should say. I think that's Wednesday. We'll get the FOMC minutes on Wednesday. We'll get the jobless claims. And again, if they come in elevated, can throw cold water on this recession business. Going to somehow magically avoid a recession. We got that retail sales data, best number that we've had in 2 years. The narrative now is, oh, we're not going to have a recession. Retail sales is good. Have a recession. Happens at every single top you see. Type of economic data comes in strong, and so talking heads on the financial channels come out and say, oh, we're not going to have a recession now. Recession's canceled. And this number, again, it's coming elevated here the last couple of times. Again, that could be something. We have Powell there at the Jackson Hole retreat on Friday. So today the market had a gap and fill. Gapped higher, we went back, we filled the gap, and then we resumed the advance. We're advancing on very, very light volume ahead of FOMC minutes on Wednesday and Powell's speech on Friday there at Jackson Hole. At the very end of the day, we saw a pop based on day traders short selling. Continue to have divergences forming intraday. Have these gap and goes. Talked about them on the 60-minute chart. His rally on the S&P took us right back to this trend line right here. We were just under it on the log scaling. We overthrew it already on the linear scaling, but we're right here at it, just above the 78.6 Fibonacci. Now, we've seen this rally back up. We still have the 10 below the 20. We'll probably see a bullish cross here. In all likelihood, tomorrow, 10 and 20 are still below the 50. So again, at some point, we're going to pull back. We're advancing on declining volume at this point. I keep saying we're getting these powerful swings up and down, up and down. When the S&P was down here, that we were making an attempt to go back and test the moving averages and fill the gaps. Saw above the 50 period on this 60-minute chart, and that gave us a bigger move back up to overthrow the 50 and continue going. So again, powerful moves. Again, big drop, big drop. This was 3 days. Now over 2 weeks, again, we've recovered all of those losses and now moving above those levels where that loss decline, sharp decline began. So again, these powerful moves back, and we're probably going to see more of it. We're probably going to see another powerful move back down, very sharp move, probably come back and fill some or all of these gaps. Again, got a good shot. the next sell-off is a higher low. Again, probably it will be a pretty dramatic move as well. We're seeing these big, exaggerated moves in the stock market. A sign of a topping process. Now, believe it or not, the 10 period is still below the 20 in the daily. That's probably going to turn bullish tomorrow. The 50 here in the 60-minute time frame is still below the 200 period. RSI is moving to a new high at an extreme. MACD is forming a divergence here. Show you some intraday charts talking about these gap fills. Again, if we take out the momentum line, if we take out the momentum cloud, the trend line, we'll likely see a retracement back to fill some of these gaps. Again, at the peak here, we formed a divergence. We dropped below the 50, tried to get above it here, got rejection at the 200, held below the 50, held below the 50, got back above the 50 after filling this first gap, back to fill the next gap, the second gap here, but held onto momentum. Again, we held above the momentum line, the momentum cloud, the 20 period is the blue line there, and held on to momentum, and it carried us up to the 200, beyond it, over through that 50 period in the daily time frame. So again, you still have a bearish rising wedge, you're still at extremes. Again, probably going to see more exaggerated moves. Now, again, look at over here when we were dropping, we had this gap and go. Pretty powerful drop here, pretty powerful drop here, pretty powerful rebound here. When we had this drop right here, we pulled back to the 50, then we dropped below the 200, and then we pulled back to the 200, again, filling that gap right there. So again, that was a pretty powerful move. People thought that the sell-off was over at that time. We had that 8% 3-day drop on the S&P 500, nearly 11% on NASDAQ. The point I'm making here is that we pulled back to these levels. We pulled back to these levels, and in dropping below the 200, here we got above the 200, we have not pulled back to these levels. So again, it could be another pretty dramatic move with these moves. I mean, a dramatic move for 3 days, and then over the last just over 2 weeks now, this dramatic move back up. Wild price fluctuations, up and down, up and down. So again, if we start to turn down, I'll be watching. Does spring parameter go into negative territory and we get a pullback here, showing some of these gaps? Today we had a rally, but it was on lighter volume. Do we get rejection near this trend line, turn back down? Now again, going parabolic. So again, the turn could be pretty violent here. We went parabolic down. Again, the turn was pretty violent. Could be the same here, but you do have the gap resistance directly overhead here. You do have the gap fill, and again, breathtaking up, scary move down. I mean, these moves are really something here in the stock market right now. Huge percentage moves at a very fast pace, and then a huge percentage move back up. MACDs are looking like they're forming negative divergences on S&P and NASDAQ. RSIs look like they're moving slightly higher to new extremes. Again, you got the rising wedge here on the NASDAQ. The gap fills up here. The high is way up here. On the gap there at 19,700 and some change. So when the rising wedge breaks down, when we start taking out the cloud and the momentum line, I'll be watching to see how big of a sell-off we get with NASDAQ. Again, I think there's a very good chance that if this low can hold, you've got an ABC structure carving out. Now, same thing here. Again, these trending signals bearish are still bearish for NASDAQ in the daily time frame. S&P, the trend signal here is trying to turn bearish. It's still flatlined on the S&P 500. Again, representing the swing move and the short-term trend. Again, momentum signals have been bullish. And you got the gray shaded area. Again, do we end up rolling over, getting a higher low, or resuming the sell-off? We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. If you do sell off, again, you could get a deep sell-off before you go back and fill that gap at 20,400 on NASDAQ. The gray shaded area suggesting, and it may not be done yet, but the gray shaded area suggesting, again, something big is setting up to happen. While we're getting the exaggerated moves up and down here, we're forming another gray shaded area. And this is saying something big is about to happen. Either we're going to just go parabolic, or we're going to get a big move back down. Doesn't mean we have to go to a new low, but it could just mean we get, again, the violent moves continuing. This was a 3-day 11% drop. NASDAQ here on S&P, it was 8%. A big drop over 3 weeks, a big rebound over just over 2. But the gray shaded area is telling us something's going on. Again, today's move, we're starting to get some bullish signals now. This line represents a swing move right here, trend, short-term trend move, and it's starting to turn back to blue. Still may correct and drop back below it, but again, it could be suggesting that if we do, we get a higher low. I've already talked about momentum signals having turned bullish. We could still pull back. Here, this presents short-term swing move right here. It's still going flatlined right here. We're above it. We had a rally. We pulled back to it right here, and as we did, we moved in the other direction. So again, we could begin to move in the other direction, fill some of these gaps, or retrace or even reverse. I'll be watching momentum's turn positive. I'll be watching to see if it stays there or if it turns back into negative territory. But when we pulled back over here, it went negative, but then it turned back to positive. And the moving averages are still bearish. We could be a move back towards the 10 or 20 period moving average back to fill some of these gaps as they get a bullish cross. It could happen tomorrow, but the 10 is still below the 20 here, and they're both still below the 50. So again, I see some kind of move, whether a violent move back down or whether pull back here. We'll see what happens. We're probably going to see more distribution and then another push higher and even more distribution, because that is likely forming a topping process, the S&P. Wild swings. But we're above the 78.6 Fibonacci. Gap resistance is directly overhead. And again, the gap fill above that. I do think, again, we will move to new highs. Parabolic. Don't reverse. Try to do it now, but it's on lighter volume. And as we eventually move towards the Fed pivot, we are going to move to new high. We could see, again, more distribution, possibly before that new high is reached. Again, NASDAQ moving towards the 78.6 Fibonacci and towards the, we filled the gap right here today. We filled the gap, and then you have this gap resistance above the 78.6 Fibonacci. But NASDAQ sold off nearly 16%, 3-day drop 11%, and then this big rebound back up just over 2 weeks now. Again, the 10 period is still below the 20 period, so we're probably going to see some kind of pullback as they get a bullish cross. I've said, again, if this is a 5-leg push down, it could be that we have an ABC structure on NASDAQ that eventually comes back up here to fill the gap at 20,400, but doesn't make a new high. Very possible. And again, wild swings up, wild swings down. Again, this was on declining volume here. This followed. This is on declining volume now. So again, we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But you do have the 78.6 Fibonacci there at 19,998, just under 20,000. Fills at 20,400. We have just now come back up to fill this gap, so we'll be watching that as negative divergences could come to a conclusion in the next day or two here. One thing I'm monitoring on the intraday charts, I'm looking at the cloud on the 4-hour chart of futures I'm showing you in this video, and I'm looking here at the momentum line here intraday on the S&P. When it turned over here, we had the reversal. When it turned here, we got a counter trend. Couldn't flip it. It was a unconfirmed bullish momentum signal because it didn't flip the trend, and then we got that 3-day sell-off. I'm watching this right here to see if that turns. If it does, then again, we'll either get a pullback or reversal. Watching to see, does it change the trend in here intraday? S&P 500 here. Same thing here. Again, this looks at the trend. This looks at momentum right here. Started clearing the 50 period on the 60-minute charts. We started seeing the momentum flip back up here and change the trend intraday charts once we got the higher low and filled the gap. Be watching to see if these signals start to change. If they do, and maybe I'll show you these signals since we're getting these wild swings up and down, up, down, up, big percentage moves, very short amount of time. If these signals change, I'll try to show you these charts, just some of the charts that I look at sessions. But we'll see if a pullback starts with the 60-minute charts in the next day or two, maybe this week with FOMC minutes or with Powell's speech. We're not so far getting it ahead of his speech. Today, we'll be watching these gaps that have taken place on the S&P and NASDAQ.